Good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Bill London with your crazy Oregon news. I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Fridays, right here on KPNW, streaming live at kpnw.com. And news brought to you by Sean Sutherland, or as we like to call him, SS. So he is with Ask Insurance. People have a lot of questions, particularly about Medicare and about insurance in general, and why wouldn't they? So with Sean Sutherland, just ask. He specializes in just about anything when it comes to insurance, but he focuses on Medicare and in particular folks who need help figuring it all out. So just call him and ask. All right, here's a look at our crazy news. We're going to start off with a story that indeed is crazy in a very sad and tragic way. But it was also a story from Oregon that gained national prominence, and it has to do with crime for sure. So a man who was accused of murdering 4 people on the Oregon coast and then kidnapping a woman in Springfield, Oregon, and taking her on a harrowing trip from Oregon to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, before he turned himself into police, has been found guilty, except for insanity, in a stipulated facts trial. Now, he is now being committed to the Oregon State Hospital for the rest of his life. Big fat asterisk there. So let's go back to June of 2021. At that point, Owen Evans Nicholson, a 34-year-old, murdered his father, Charles Nicholson, at an RV campground near Mill Casino in North Bend, and in the process, stole his father's truck. Then, as he was leaving, he ran over and killed Anthony and his wife, Linda Oyster. Then he drove to Florence on the Oregon coast, where he went into Herbal Choices marijuana dispensary and shot and killed Jennifer Davidson there. Then from the coast, he drove on Highway 126 all the way to Springfield, Oregon, where he then kidnapped Laura Johnson at the Gateway Mall parking lot. Now, from there, he forced her to drive him to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, Johnson, for her credit, was actually able to convince him to turn himself into authorities, which he did. Now, originally, he was charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of failing to perform the duties of a driver, 2 counts of recklessly endangering another person, and 2 counts of first-degree kidnapping. Now, in custody, Nicholson was diagnosed as having schizophrenia with paranoia and delusions, and they said that he continues to suffer from mental illness. Forensic psychologists testified that Nicholson's schizophrenia makes him believe the federal government and people working for the government are intent on killing him, and that he has to kill them to defend himself. Now, according to court documents, Nicholson believed that all 4 of the people that he killed were federal agents, and that 2 of the people that he killed are still alive. And it was announced this week that Nicholson was found guilty, except for insanity, on 4 counts of murder, 2 counts of reckless endangering, and 1 count of kidnapping. And he was sentenced, again, big asterisk, to spend the rest of his life in the Oregon State Hospital. Now, here's where the asterisk comes in. He's under the supervision of the Psychiatric Security Review Board. And when it comes to that group, a life sentence really isn't. You see, the Psychiatric Security Review Board can and has the authority to give Nicholson a conditional release or discharge him outright, which we have seen them do a number of times in Oregon. As a matter of fact, I think Rick covered one of the stories where this has actually occurred. Now, that reality, in case you don't believe it, no, the guy has killed 4 people, kidnapped a woman, drove her all the way to Wisconsin, or she drove him. There's no way. They would never let this guy out. Okay, well, the reality of that actually happening was recognized by the judge during sentencing, because a part of the sentencing, he ordered the Psychiatric Security Review Board to inform Laura Johnson, the woman that he kidnapped, of any orders or hearings related to Nicholson and to inform her if he's conditionally released or discharged. This guy could actually be out in the streets as early as 2 to 3 years from now. 19 people were indicted in a $500,000 fraud scheme, and it involves Oregon SNAP benefits. Those are like food stamps. And you may think to yourself, well, they were just stealing the money. Well, they kind of were, but it was what they were doing with the money that makes this different. Now, according to the Oregon Department of Justice, the group used skimming machines and stolen EBT accounts, and they went out and they bought baby formula, $500,000 worth. Then they kept it in storage units in Oregon and Washington on pallets. Then they shipped it to California, where they repackaged it and sold it on the baby formula black market. I didn't know there was one. There is. Last October, federal agents arrested 17 people in their own investigation, and some of those suspects were the same ones that were indicted in Oregon. Now, last week, and I don't think that we reported this last week, but the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality was hacked by, cyber attacked. And their servers now completely need to be rebuilt from that cyber attack, because the technicians say that's the only way they're going to be able to remove all of the infected files, which apparently there were millions of them. Now, they hope to have this work complete by tomorrow, although last week they said they were going to have the problem solved Friday of last week. So it's anybody's guess. They also say that they're putting in a number of different safety measures. DEQ employees don't have their state laptops. They work on laptops that are provided for them by the state of Oregon. Well, they don't have those because those were infected too. So they're trying to work from their phones, which, if you've ever tried to do that all day long, it takes a while. Oregon Information Services say they're rebuilding over 400 laptops, and they hope to have them ready tomorrow to send out to those particular offices. So this comes to us from Corvallis, Oregon, the home of Oregon State University. By unanimous decision of the City Council in the city of Corvallis, they have passed a resolution making Corvallis the only city in Oregon that is a transgender, gender diverse, and intersex sanctuary city. As part of the resolution, Corvallis affirmed that they would not aid in any way the enforcement of federal, state, or out-of-state laws or mandates that would threaten the ability of any person, regardless of age, to receive gender-affirming care, or, in the city's view, discriminates against gender-diverse people. The one thing they did acknowledge is that they may run up against the federal government, and they do stand to potentially lose federal money. And they said, well, we'll deal with that when we get to it. Okay, so earlier this week, Tuesday, was tax day. And on tax day, Oregon House Republicans were able to force a floor vote in the Oregon legislature on several bills that would have lowered taxes for both low and middle income Oregonians in the form of income tax cuts. It would also remove the taxes on tips, and they also forced at least a vote on the repeal of Oregon's hidden sales tax, which is also known as a corporate activity tax. Now, because of House rules, Democrats couldn't block the votes being taken. They couldn't do that, although they could vote on it. And the votes forced them to either stand behind Oregon's fourth in the nation highest taxes for taxpayers, or vote to lower taxes for Oregon constituents. And as you can figure, they didn't vote for any of them. They all failed, including voting against the very popular idea of removing taxes on tips. Now, also, it was announced this week that on April 1st, House Republicans hand-delivered a letter to House Speaker Julie Fahey, a Democrat from Eugene, requesting fair hearings, work sessions, and a floor vote on priority cost of living legislation that would provide some desperate relief for Oregonians. And that was over 2 weeks ago, and to date, they have received zero response. It is becoming routine that the Oregon State Hospital is in danger once again of losing its accreditation. Now, the Oregon State Hospital is where Oregon puts its most mentally ill people, and many of them are very dangerous, including the man that we talked about in the very first story. That's where he's going to be going. So it's been threatened several times by the feds in the last couple of years, and once again, that the Oregon State Hospital is in danger of losing its Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, which would cost the state of Oregon millions upon millions of dollars. Since 2020, a total of 21 patients have died because of neglect of one form or another at the Oregon State Hospital. Now, the hospital has previously been warned about the risk of losing the reimbursements from the feds after a number of incidents, including 3 patient deaths. After yet another death at the end of March, the hospital for the mentally ill is on the feds' watch list. After the most recent death that I mentioned in March, as we reported earlier, there was a leadership overhaul at the Oregon State Hospital, and it's been overhauled again. Governor Tina Kotek appointed Dave Baden, who's currently the Deputy Director of Policy and Programs at the Oregon Health Authority. He's now the acting superintendent. The governor directed OHA to make a 30-day plan to address patient care and safety. So, in doing so, the hospital says it's now monitoring patients 24/7 to alert any units of any changes in a patient's condition. Now, this ongoing issue has caught the attention of legislators in Salem, but as you would figure, both sides have their own take on it. House Minority Leader, Republican Christine Drazen, says that the hospital doesn't have proper staffing. And she says, quote, "We need to have the staffing necessary to make sure the protocols are met." That would mean extra funding. But the Democrats in the legislature, well, they want to spend the money elsewhere. So the way that they respond comes from House Speaker, Democrat Julie Fahey, who says that the legislature will instead continue to prioritize executive branch accountability. She says, "We're committed to that." So, a new job for Oregon's Bureau of Labor and Industries. Now, they're the ones that essentially enforce labor laws. They also ensure that, for instance, employees get paid the proper amount, that if they work overtime, they get paid for it. It is about labor and industries and employees. Well, they have a new job, and it was given to them by Governor Tina Kotek. Now, they're going to start investigating bullying, discrimination, and harassment of students in public schools involving race, national origin, and immigration status. Governor Tina Kotek says her new guidelines for bullying will give schools the tools to protect students and send a message that everyone is welcome in classrooms. Kotek says the policy will remain in effect regardless of potential changes to federal law. Now, like I said, bullies' job, this is part of their duty, or is their duty, is to deal with workplaces, including matters of pay and employment laws. So, what does this actually have to do with schools? Why wouldn't this be done, say, by the Oregon Department of Education or by the individual school districts, or maybe even the Department of Justice if we're talking about immigration status? Now, here's an interesting note. There is a Senate bill 426, and we've talked about it here. And essentially what it would do is extend liability for wage theft claims. So for instance, let's say that you go out and you buy a new home that is being constructed in, say, some new development. And before it's finished, you pay for that house up front. Now, this could even be an office building or something, but you pay for it up front in full. And then let's say the main contractor doesn't pay his subcontractors and skips off with the money. Well, with Senate Bill 426, the person who bought the property would now be on the hook for actually paying the people that didn't get paid by the main contractor, and that person would have to foot all of the money for that. And the contractor would be able to walk away scot-free. Now, you may be asking, well, what does this have to do with the school thing? Because the reason given and the rationalization for this exact bill is because its proponents claim BOLI doesn't have enough funds to actually collect the money for the subcontractors. They say, well, we don't have time to do that, and we don't have the money to do that. And so we need to have this bill. Well, if they don't have the money to actually do the job that is part of essentially their legal mandate or was, where are they going to find the money to actually enforce immigration laws and bullying in schools? So Oregon's wildfire map, which we have talked about so many times, that drew so much hate and so much consternation from landowners, is going to die in this legislative session. It has been guaranteed by both parties. But while the map may be scrapped, many of the restrictions that were going to be on landowners probably will still be in play. And it's due to some interesting wording. Now, Senate Bill 83 would completely do away with the maps, but what it allows instead is for local governments to adopt their own models for building and fire codes and land restrictions and what you can do with your land to increase fire resilience. Homeowners in urban areas, of course, blasted the map. Farmers in rural areas attacked it. Even county leaders from around the state were urging citizens, at least in eastern Oregon, to swamp the state with complaints from individual reviews. Now, the chief author and architect of the bill that created the maps, Democratic Senator from Ashland, Jeff Golden, said the hazard ratings and associated regulations were over the top. And now they're just going to dump it in counties' laps, and this particular bill is also authored by Jeff Golden. The registration of non-citizens to vote in Oregon is a continued plague on the Oregon Department of Transportation and the DMV motor voter program. In Oregon, you go to get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. So if you recall, ODOT last year discovered 1,600 people they'd registered to vote who actually weren't U.S. citizens, but they still registered them to vote. And then they found some more. Well, last Friday, they announced, hey, we found another 118 people who were registered as citizens able to vote in Oregon, even though their documentation showed otherwise. Now, this particular group, which was taken from samples, actually occurred between 2010 and 2020, which was a period that Oregon DMV said there would be no problems. There was even no reason to go back and look. Now, they said that because in January of 2021, they had gone through a computer software system upgrade, and that's what caused all of the problems. Well, now they find out that going back as far as 2010, they'd incorrectly registered people to vote, and now they say, yeah, we're going to have to do a new audit. They say the 118 new registered but shouldn't have been registered voters were actually spread across 18 counties, and now, more work to do on their part again. All right, Rick, It's time for you to roll out the reel. Again, thanks to Sean Sutherland at Ask Insurance for sponsoring the crazy news. Hope you have a good rest of your week.